evening, everyone. Tonight is July 13th, 2022. It's 6:33.5 p.m. And I would like to call to order the Columbus City Council meeting. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me if you care to.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moving on to letter B is the consent agenda. Would someone please make the motion to approve?
This is Rob. I'll make a motion to approve.
So we have a motion to approve. I'll second it. Are there any questions on the agenda, on the consent agenda, or comment? Hearing none, I'll call for a roll call vote because we are in an interactive meeting. I'll start with Janet.
Janet, aye.
Rob, aye.
Shelley, aye.
Sue, aye.
And Jesse, aye. So the consent agenda is approved. Moving on to letter C, the public open forum. Is there anyone here who would like to speak at the public open forum? No? All right. There's no one here who would, we do have guests tonight, so that's unusual. Thanks for coming up, but apparently they don't want to talk. Number 10 is a planning commission report, but there was no meeting, so there will be no report. And we'll move on to number 11, a MnDOT master partnership contract, and that's pages 1 through 19 in our packets.
Mr. Mayor and council members, this is a standard contract that the state of Minnesota looks towards the city. Every 3 years, there's a new contract put before you, and it's basically a contract put in place for future projects with an understanding of what the cost share and the different factors for their contract. So while we don't have any projects today, should there be a bridge project or a construction project, this contract would be in place, and then there would be a joint powers agreement as such. So what you have here is the contract and then a resolution approving that contract.
Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor and Council, I would just add it doesn't obligate the city to anything unless there is a project.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Bill.
Mr. Mayor and Council, it doesn't obligate the city to anything unless there is a project.
Okay. So I'll make the motion to approve. What is the resolution number?
Number 12.
2212, entering into a master partnership with MnDOT contract number 1050141. Would someone please second it?
This is Janet, I second.
It's moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? Then I'll call for a roll call vote again.
Janet, aye.
Rob, aye.
Shelley, aye.
Sue, aye.
And Jesse, aye. Moving on to letter D, staff and consultant reports. We have number 12 is the engineer report from our city engineer, Kevin Bittner, on the 2022 projects, and I see Kevin's online. Good evening, Kevin.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. Kevin Bittner, City Engineer. I'll give you updates on 3 different projects. Kettle River Heights, our residential pavement reconstruction project got underway on Monday. The existing pavement has all been reclaimed. The contractor is working on removing some of the excess material so to make way for the new pavement, and that's was underway today. And I would say by the end of next week we might have a new pavement out there. So it's moving along quickly and should be done shortly. The Hornsby Street project also got underway this week. That existing pavement has been milled off, and they're going to be doing the grading work on that road in preparation for the new pavement section. And they're also, that's part construction, and they're talking about paving as early as next week, which is a good thing because we can see that Loves is nearing completion and hoping to open up by the 1st of August. So that project will move along quickly as well. In regards to West Freeway Drive, in terms of that design work and bidding that project, that's a little bit on hold right now. There is some activity going on in regards to right-of-way acquisition. And so we're trying to get all those things in place before we final off the plans and move to bidding. So that involves MnDOT turnback, which seems to be moving along, and we should get official word of that turnback soon. And I know that Bill and Elizabeth have been working on the private property acquisition as well. So there is activity on that project. So that's my project updates. If you have any questions on those projects or anything else, I'll be happy to entertain those. If not,
So do we have an estimate of when we might be able to go on bid? I mean, I don't, based on the right-of-way acquisition and the easement acquisition and stuff, is it like a month or a couple of weeks or 2 months or?
Well, Mr. Mayor and Council, the answer is really, we're doing this on a willing party basis. So if we were in a quick take process, we could tell you it's 90 days after notice. But since we're not using eminent domain, or hope not to, we're having a good discussion with the property owners. They've provided some appraisal information. We've provided some additional information back to them. So it's moving. You know, best guess would be we should be able to wrap it up in 30 days, but that really depends on whether we can reach an agreement. It's likely that we would come back to you in a closed session with, you know, the final number for the council to consider.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have one quick question for Mr. Bittner. Is there any updates on the bidding for the Kettle River Heights project currently?
Kettle River Heights is bid and under construction right now.
Currently?
That's the first one you reported.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry about that. I thought he was talking about over by Caribou because they're dumping millings there.
All right, Kevin, 170th Street, 170th Avenue.
Okay, so the last time we discussed this was when we had the neighborhood meeting back at the end of June. And I believe the way we left that is the council's considering the action to take on the petition that was submitted by the residents in that neighborhood. I believe the petition basically essentially requests that the city close that connection of 170th Avenue to the Thornback Preserve Second Edition. And so we heard comments from the residents that evening. There were some nuisance complaints in regards to speeding motorcycles, noisy motorcycles, perhaps some, high-speed traffic by the judgment of the neighborhood out there. We also provided some information in regards to traffic counts and our speed study that was conducted here earlier in the year, and the evidence provided by that data indicates that there hasn't been what we would consider a significant impact of either additional traffic or speeds that are out of line on 170th. Just by way of additional information, and when we look at Columbus in general, we have a number of dead-end streets that are abutting undeveloped properties. So it would seem to indicate that when those original developments went in, there was probably some intention that those roadways would be extended into that undeveloped property, and that's basically what we have here with this situation. We did hear some irritation from the neighborhood that not many people were notified of the subdivision that was going in. But as we've heard in the past, that the city did follow the requirements for notification. So those were followed. Whether that was rigorous enough to notify everybody, I guess, and whether those requirements can be modified, I guess I'll leave that to the city attorney to address those. So the way I see it right now, the council has some options in front of them. They could deny the petition and leave the road open as it's currently constructed. They could accept that petition and move to close 170th, and then we're dealing with basically 2 dead-end roads, and how we would deal with that. Our recommendation, if that's the situation, is that we'd want to move toward building 2 cul-de-sacs, 2 turnarounds, so we can deal with those dead ends and what that would require. You could defer the decision and look for additional information, as we discussed, doing a more detailed analysis on what the cost would be to close those roads and move toward constructing cul-de-sacs at that area. For what it's worth, my recommendation, it would be to deny the petition and leave the road open as it currently sits. As I indicated, the evidence from the data that we have doesn't indicate a large impact. Again, we have some nuisance complaints, but whether that's justification to, close those roads, I guess I'll leave that to the council to decide. I guess I would also advise that if we move toward closing those roads, we have to consider what kind of precedent that would set, because we do have a number of, again, as I indicated, a number of roadways that do abut undeveloped property, dead-end roads that abut undeveloped property. So how we would handle that in the future as that undeveloped property develops, this could be a precedent if we wind up closing that road again. So again, that's just some background. Elizabeth can fill in any gaps that I might have left, and council certainly it's left to your discussion and any questions you might have.
Mr. Mayor and council members, you had one legal question which we have emailed to our city attorney, and the question was surrounding whether or not we would be able to use the Chapter 429 process, which would have been a process where we would assess back the cost of constructing 2 cul-de-sacs, and whether or not we would be able to do that. So I'll turn it over to Bill.
Mr. Mayor and Council, from a strict legal standard, yes, you can use Chapter 429, which is the special assessment authority under state law. The question always is whether you can demonstrate as a city that there's a special benefit to the property, and the special benefit has to at least equal the assessment. It can obviously be more than the assessment. So when you get into an appeal, the other side may argue, well, there's no benefit, but this would be the same side that would be arguing for the improvements. So what we would recommend is, if you want to use a special assessment mechanism, that you require the petitioners, much like we do a developer, to waive any rights of appeal. So they can't come back and say, okay, now that you've improved the road, we're going to appeal the assessments. Obviously, they probably couldn't do that because there's a 30-day appeal period, so you could actually let that appeal period run. But the point is, if somebody wants a change in the road that, against the recommendation of the city engineer, well, that's because they think it benefits their neighborhood. And so you don't want them arguing later that there's no benefit, and therefore they're not going to pay the assessment. Now, that's if you decide that that's an appropriate mechanism for financing the improvements. You may decide to take it out of city funds, but I wanted to give you those options. So special assessments are okay. Special benefits a question. You'd want a development agreement or some sort of assessment agreement that waives a right to appeal those assessments.
If we were to use the Chapter 429 process, as Kevin indicated during our workshop, you would have to order a feasibility study. So in order to put the neighborhood on notice of what the cost would be, you would have to then fund the feasibility study. And I think at the neighborhood meeting, Kevin indicated it would be about $10,000.
This is Janet. I have a question. I think one of the other things that related to the Chapter 429 process is if we would follow the same petitioning mechanism that we do when we put in a new road, or a gravel road gets paved. And I'm thinking that if the answer to that is yes, that would be the first step, because if there wasn't a majority of the property owners willing to fund it, then the deal's off, right? So then we don't pay for the feasibility study and we don't worry about the other, or am I misunderstanding that?
That is the process, but we do hire the engineer to do analysis, because going to that neighborhood meeting, if you don't have numbers and you don't have a estimate of what it's going to cost, then there's nothing to vote. There's nothing to vote on. You know what I mean? So we've always gone back to the neighborhood meeting with information. So I think when Kevin talked at the neighborhood meeting, he felt that if we were going to do a study, we would have to do the feasibility study to get the true cost, because we had to do land acquisition. I mean, there were things that you just can't guesstimate at, and that's why it would cost that much money.
Is it possible to do the petition and sort of, I mean, I know that neighborhood submitted a petition, but that was without the knowledge of what it would take to do this, or that it would need to be paid for by the properties that are along, along the improved roadway. So it feels to me that, if they came back with a petition showing that, yes, there's enough property owners that are willing to do that, that would be the first step. Then we order the feasibility study, then we do the city, whatever, real petition. I hate to spend $10,000 on something that might just die in the water, because there's 5 people that have come pretty much the last 3 meetings we've had, and there's 20-some people that live along the stretch and many of the people that signed, I shouldn't say many, several of the people that signed that original petition don't even live there anymore. So I feel like this is stretched out long enough that we almost need to start that process over, because I don't think it was in anybody's mind at the time they made that request that the cost, I mean, I think they thought you could put up a gate and they'd be done with it. You close off the road. They didn't realize it'd have to be right away purchased, and turnarounds for trucks and plows to turn around and things like that when we first started having this conversation.
Bill, when we do a Chapter 425 road project, we added a neighborhood meeting, and that's when we had our engineer come in with what I would call a cost estimate based on projects they've had, and it costs anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 to put the work together, and then the neighborhood meeting. And then there was, like, I won't say, it used to be a hand raising, and people didn't like that. So then we went to a secret folded paper kind of vote. But it was very informal. But what that was, should we move forward? It was a temperature on how many people are really interested after they heard that they were going to pay for it, that they would have to be a participant in it. Once we did that, then formal petitions went out, because the council was willing to spend the money on the feasibility study, and that's when they signed on the dotted line and with a number, and we said, you're assessed 2 units and it's this cost, and that's when they signed, and we had formal petitions come in, so that the council knew at that point that generally they weren't going to have someone appeal, because the whole point of us doing those formal petitions was that we didn't want to have to prove benefit. We wanted to make sure people really wanted the project.
And I think the conversation has evolved since that early or that first neighborhood meeting too, where the petitioners were all on 170th, and what we heard at our last neighborhood meeting was that some of the people in the Thornbeck Preserve were here and also were in support of that, because they didn't like, the traffic coming from the 170th and buzzing through their neighborhood fast because it's paved. So I feel like it's really evolved to a point where you almost have to start at the beginning.
Mr. Mayor and Council, I think the critical difference here is that when someone's petitioning for a road project, they understand that they're going to pay something like $700-800 per unit per lot. And I think there's an assumption here, perhaps, I have not been in the discussions with the neighborhood, but there's an assumption that, as the city engineer said, you can put up barricades and you're done. So I think if they understand that there's right-of-way acquisition, there's costs, there's assessments, that it's a much more involved process, I think that would be helpful. I don't know that you have to start all over, and I haven't seen the petition, so I don't know if it constitutes a a valid petition for road improvement or if it's just kind of a neighborhood survey. There's a process under Chapter 429 for petitioning for public improvements. And I would expect that they didn't necessarily know that and follow that statute.
That's correct. I think what the petition was we would like you to close the road, and then
Right.
people signed it.
So I think the answer is you don't necessarily have to start over, but certainly some more information needs to be given. And I think what would be helpful tonight is if the council reaches a consensus on whether or not you're going to use Chapter 429. And then that way we have the information to inform the neighbors to say, okay, the council's given direction, they won't consider the project. Not that you're going to agree ultimately to do the project, but you won't consider the project if it's not paid for by the people petitioning for it. That would send clear direction to the residents that this is not going to be a free project and that there's going to be some ownership of this project by the people asking for it. That may be the end of it, or it may go to, as you say, a more formal process.
And then my second question is, how do you determine in advance whether the project cost equals the the value of the improvement?
Well, you don't. Typically what happens, you don't generally on the front end. If it's going to be something that's very contentious, we'll use an appraisal process. However, when you have a neighborhood petitioning for a project and you get over 50%, you have a pretty strong likelihood that the project's going to go forward and that there'll be few appeals. You can also wait for the 30-day appeal period to run, and then you know if there's any appeals. And you can say, we're not going to go forward if there are any appeals. Now there's no right of appeal, so you don't necessarily have to have like a developer's agreement where you sign off. You just simply wait for that appeal period to run 30 days. Now you know you can go forward and assess the project. But I think the starting point is if people understood, and perhaps, I looked to the city administrator, perhaps there'd be a one-page, information sheet. Council gave this direction, here's what it means, and assessments can run anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 per lot. And, but we don't even know those numbers today.
And we don't know that number until we do the engineers.
Yeah, the formal petitions is after the feasibility study and when a 429 process, and when they go out, they actually see the number. This is what, you know what I mean? And granted, it's an engineer's estimate, but it's pretty close because we haven't gone out for bid yet, but it's pretty darn close. When they're at the neighborhood meeting, it's just a guesstimate. So that's why we do it twice.
So,
And one last comment on that is in my mind, the only way to do this fairly is that everybody's on that road. Everybody who's on the road is going to pay for it. And because you can't say, well, I'm going to pick up your assessment, or we have to assess. We have to treat everybody on the project the same.
And would that be everybody on 170th and everybody on DePaul? Because that's a lot of properties.
DePaul didn't ask. DePaul didn't have the petition. Granted, there were people here, but DePaul didn't petition for a cul-de-sac. And I believe that while there's not a turnaround on this one because it was a through road, so we didn't get the easement, on the south leg there is a turnaround because it's intended, the road goes through. So this is a little bit different because all those people paid for that paved road in the purchase price of their home. So, I'm not sure how this one would work because they already have a paved road in front of their house.
Right, and that's where it gets really dicey. I think the starting point in my mind is if council gives us direction that you want this assessed, you don't want it to come out of the general taxpayers' funding, transportation funding, then we write a very simple note back in response to the petition. Here's the direction the council's given. What that means is there will be an assessment, there will be a feasibility study, there will be a cost, and everybody who's deemed to be benefited by that improvement is going to be assessed. That's a bit of a judgment call because if what you're saying is both subdivisions receive some benefit because there isn't through traffic, then where do you draw the line? And that's going to be a bit of an exercise. I think with that information, we'll see if they come back, and they should petition, give a formal petition under Chapter 429, which means you you identify the very specific project that's going to be developed, 2 cul-de-sacs at the end of the road, and we go from there.
But before the formal petition, would you have some sort of informal feedback, just to, like Elizabeth said, to sort of take the temperature? Because I'm just saying that initial petition was just about putting up some barricades and not letting people drive through.
If the council gives us direction that this is a Chapter 429 project, if we follow our past process, then it's up to the petitioners to go sign up the neighborhood.
Okay,
You know, it's on them.
yep, okay.
Yep. So I think that's the easiest way to say, if you really want this project, you go door to door. You know, at the top it says, I hereby petition for, 2 cul-de-sacs on either end. We'll help them describe, that paragraph, but then they've got to take it and get it signed up.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yep.
This is Shelley. I have a question because I feel like we're opening up this huge can of worms by saying, you can do this when, let's say 75% of the people say they want to do this with the cul-de-sacs, but 25% don't. And now you're going to assess, every single property, and the 25% are going to say, just because cars can go past my house instead of having to stop in a turnaround, that doesn't add any value to my house. I'm having a problem that they're going to cause problems on the back end.
Mr. Mayor and Council, you have a very simple decision tonight. You can take the recommendation of your engineer and deny the petition. There's nothing more has to happen. So if you feel that way, you'd make a motion to deny the petition and it's done. And so I'm just telling you, those are your options. And if you feel that this is not going in a good direction and you want to accept the professional recommendation of your engineer, it's all over tonight.
So question on that, if we deny this petition again, does that stop them from coming back in with a petition from both neighborhoods to approach us again, or is it just done
No,
then?
they could do it again.
They can do it
They
as
can
many
come
times
back.
as they like. We've had neighbors, streets
Yeah,
come back
3
for
times.
years when they finally get the right number. We could give them, you could do a both end, and I'm not trying to give you too many permutations, but you could say essentially, we're turning this down, but if you want to petition it like a typical road project, now that you understand you're paying for it, here's the form. Go out and knock yourselves out, But if you kind of want to end the conversation, you can simply just turn it down. Or you can say, we're turning it down, but you can come back with a road project petition, just like if somebody wants blacktop.
And how will the residents get that information? That's a letter we send out to them?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and Council, whatever direction you give us, we'll certainly, we'll certainly do that. We can draft a letter. We can talk to the 5 people that were here. It really depends on what you want to have done.
Yeah. So what does everybody think of that?
So, my opinion is that we would, I have some sympathy for the folks that came forward and didn't realize, like, who would know that when they put in a development that the road was intended to go through or not go through. I would never know that either. I am not in favor of having this be a city-funded project. I would only be in favor of this if we could follow the 429 process. And so, but I think I don't think that most of the people that would be impacted by this recognize the expense that they would incur and whether they would agree to it. And so I am not worried about the precedent setting, because I think that people are willing to pay for it, and it's not a problem for the city or for our ability for our emergency responders or our plow trucks to get through. It's like, all right, that's okay with me. But I just think that where this started and where it ended are very far apart. So we need to close that gap of knowledge by sending the letter out and explaining that this would be on their dime and they would have to redo their petition.
Shelley or Sue, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Janet that it's, I don't think we we should go through the 429 process where the citizens are assessed. I think that's only fair. My only question, I thought of something else, and this is kind of out in left field just a little bit. Can we do anything else on that road? Like maybe put in a speed bump or something like that that would slow the traffic down?
Well, it's a gravel road, so I don't know.
Oh, it's a gravel road. That's right. Shoot. I was thinking of the part that was paved. Never mind.
Good point, Sue, but maybe where the bituminous met the gravel, or just after the gravel.
It'd be a problem for plowing, wouldn't it?
Good point, yeah. Or some
It
sort of
would
rumble.
shave the bump off every winter.
This is
Mr. Mayor.
Shelley. The problem is the problem is we're forgetting the money that we've already spent on this, on the speed thing and the, you know, and the observation that we did, the money that we put toward the attorneys, you know, I assume the engineers did things. We've spent a lot of Columbus tax dollars on this particular problems, and it has not been appreciated. The people basically say, I want this, and that's it. And the thing is that if we go through with the process, I really feel like we really shouldn't spend another dime of our money, of the people's money on this. So I get kind of confused as to where we go in the process and when we start accruing fees, either for the attorney, the engineer, whoever. I don't mind sending letters out to people and explaining the situation, but they have to understand that, you know, we proved to them that there really isn't a problem in that area. I mean, people were going under the speed limit, and I'm really having a hard time with that. And now it's kind of morphed into, well, we're going to get the other, you know, neighborhood involved and that sort of thing. And I think that this could go on, and we could spend a heck of a lot of money on one problem when basically it's somebody saying, I want, but not being able to prove, except anecdotally, that there is a problem.
So I don't think we're spending any money other than the cost of a letter at this point. We wouldn't be doing the feasibility study until there was demonstration that there are enough people who understood that they would be assessed and were willing to move forward with that. And I think, I mean, Kevin would have to speak to whatever amount he has spent, but I know like the equipment that was used for the speed study, I mean, that was all borrowed equipment, or equipment, the counters that we had are, so I don't know that there's been time. There's definitely a time investment, there's no doubt there, but I don't think we've spent a lot of taxpayer dollars. I think we've demonstrated a willingness to listen to the constituents when they have a concern and a request, which I think is worth something. But I agree with you. I don't want to pay for a feasibility study at this point without knowing that there's willingness by enough people on that stretch to shoulder the cost of the project, because it's not an improvement that the city will recognize as an improvement. It's an improvement to them.
Well, this is Shelley again. The other thing is that we haven't discussed is the fact that Jim told us that having a road go through and having access for, you know, school buses and emergency equipment and that sort of thing is a benefit to the city. And so, you know, I'm just, you know, to dangle a new avenue for them to pursue, if it's a small amount, or even let's say it's 50% of the people, then you've got the other 50% that don't want it, that they don't want to pay for it, and it's not important to them. And I just feel like when we keep giving them options like that, it's gonna, and eventually it's gonna cost us money, whether we have to just have Kevin do any more, or the attorneys or whoever, you know. So I just, my feeling is that they have to understand this, and I get that it doesn't cost anything to send out the letter, and I'm willing to send out the letter, but to offer them a legal pathway that may not work for them, and then involves our staff having to handle that. And I feel like we're wading in, and we've had enough of these problems with some of these neighborhoods where there's a very small percentage of people that want something, and it's costing the city money.
Those are all good points. Shelley, would you like to make a motion then?
Well, I would make a motion to deny the petition.
And is there a second?
This is Sue, I'll second.
So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any more fine points or more discussion? Anyone?
This is Rob. I'd just say, I've had a hard time with this, and I'm understanding that it is going to cost the city a lot of money. $10,000 is a lot of money, but, if there's something we learned out of this, and we're all big on communication, if there's going to be a road pushed through into an existing development, we need to notify all those people. There was only 2 or 3 notified that road was going to be going through. To me, that's not fair, right? And I don't know if it's something we have to change within our rules, right? And I get there was an easement there, but if they knew about it, they could have petitioned to stop it ahead of time and we wouldn't be in this position, right?
I think the thing that was hard with this one is that it wasn't a notification of the road, it was a notification of the development, which included the road. And I don't know how you parse out every little piece that someone might have an issue with when you have a big PUD like that, a multi-year, multi-phase development. So I don't disagree with what you're saying, but practically speaking, this wasn't just like, oh, we're going to put a road in and so that we had a public hearing on it. It was the public hearing for the whole Thornbeck development, wasn't it?
Yeah, this was a phased development, 59 homes, you know what I mean, showing roads. So this was a, you know what I mean, a big 3-year development going through, and there was one through road, which was this one, and the rest were basically cul-de-sacs. So yeah, I mean, it was and I think we noticed it 3 times. But I think you're right, Rob. They just might have assumed that it wasn't going to go through. Do you know what I mean? And not really looked at it in big picture. Because we do send out notices and there's the website and the newspaper and such. But again, how many people really look at the plats that are coming in? So I agree there. But I think now with so many people signing up for the emails and such, maybe they'll kind of look a little bit more to those types of developments.
Anyone else? So we have a motion on the floor to deny the request to close 170th between Thornbeck Preserve and 170th, and it's been seconded. So I'll call for a roll call vote.
Darn, you're going to make me go first, aren't you? I'm going to say nay.
Nay.
Sorry.
Nay. Rob.
Okay, we have 2 yeses. We have 2
Shelley,
no. Oh, Shelley,
Sue, aye.
Sue, aye. And Jesse, aye. So the motion carries. So then you will send out a notification to everybody.
We will send out a letter. Just a little feedback from the council. Do you want the letter to go out that the current petition was denied? However, they could come back with a petition for a 429 process and explain that process would mean that they would pay for the improvement.
That wasn't in the motion, so that would be a new motion. The
Right.
motion was to simply deny the.
Deny the petition,
Yep.
correct.
And what do you suggest, Counselor?
So I'll make the motion then to direct staff to include in the letter that we denied their petition, that if they wanted to pursue the 429 project, they could come back with that.
Mrs. Rob, I'll second that.
So we have a motion and a second. Did you guys on the video hear that?
Yep.
All right. So then I'll call for the vote.
Janet, aye.
Rob, aye.
Shelley, aye.
Sue, aye.
And Jesse, aye. So the motion carries.
And I'm just going to add one point of clarification. That communication should make it clear that they can petition, but that doesn't mean that there's an approved project.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I don't want you to get backed into
Nope.
something
Perfect.
you don't want to do ultimately, so, okay.
Thank you. On to the attorney's report.
Mr. Mayor, just one item. I wanted to provide some clarification on the upcoming public hearing. You have a couple of letters that were handed out to you. The first letter is to the applicant Park Construction, and that is a a standard notice when we have to extend the 60-day period. The reason park construction is coming up is we received a letter after the council adopted a moratorium from attorneys for park construction, pointing out that the 60-day rule does not extend the time for action on a pending application. So that's the second letter in your packet. And I just want to provide a point of clarification. So the moratorium is effective on all applications, but because the 60-day rule says that an applicant, if the city doesn't take action on an application, it's deemed complete and it's deemed approved, then you would have an approved application, CUP, without any conditions as proposed. So that's kind of the worst case scenario. You don't even get to consider it. You don't get to consider conditions of approval, conditions of denial, findings of denial. And so in consultation with the city administrator, notice went out. I had council members ask questions about that. How does that happen when there's a moratorium? How it happens is the 60-day statute says you don't extend, the moratorium doesn't add time. It doesn't take away your decision-making. It doesn't take away your right to approve or deny, add conditions. So all of that's still available to you. And in my view, as your city attorney, I would say, in fact, the moratorium is effective on that permit. So even if you approve the permit at the end of the day, that it can't be issued until the moratorium is lifted, okay? But in order to comply with this statute, it is necessary for the Planning Commission to hear this application and the City Council to decide on it. Now, I'd like to take any questions you have regarding process, but I want to make sure we don't have a separate discussion about the project since it's not in front of you. So if any questions about that process?
So can I just restate to make sure I'm understanding
Sure.
what you're saying? So what I'm understanding is that there's not precedent law over a 60-day time limit trumping a moratorium or moratorium trumping the 60 days. So in order to not find ourselves in the situation where 60 days has passed and the applicant says, now we get our project because you didn't act on it, and we say, oh, no, you didn't, and then we fight it out in court, we would have a risk. Okay, thank you. That's what
Yep.
I thought you were saying. I just wanted to make sure I understood.
Yep, that's exactly it.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is Sue. I have one other question just to clarify, Bill, what you said. You said if we either approved or denied, that whole permit or application would be on hold until the moratorium is complete?
Yes, it's my view, and this is, I'm making a judgment call, so I want to be clear about that. I don't have a case to point to, but it's my view that since the moratorium says no permit can issue, conditional use permit is a permit, then if you decide to approve as a council, you can approve with conditions, but the applicant would have to understand that it's our view, or at least my view, that the moratorium does trump the issuance of the permit. It doesn't trump the decision, because you have to go through this process to have a hearing, but you cannot, at least in my view, with a moratorium on, issue that permit until the moratorium is lifted.
Okay, that makes sense.
And so a lot can happen, and I think the best thing to do is ask questions about process, and the best thing to do about the application is to save your questions about the use until it gets in front of you in a hearing or as the council.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
That's it, Bill?
That's all I've got.
Assistant City Administrator's report.
No report for Jessica.
All right. City Administrator's report.
Can we go back to the Public Works report?
Oops, sorry.
Mayor and City
Sure.
Council.
Oh, yep.
You're
I'm
anxious to get out of here tonight, aren't you?
Quick, let's go. All right, let's back up to number 14. Mayor and City Council members report. Janet, have you anything to report?
I have two things. One is, last night at the workshop, I asked Elizabeth about the status of the contract for the Lions rental of the community center. And I heard back from Gina today, and she was hoping she could get it by next week when they have their Lions. Okay, I wasn't sure, so, okay. Thank you. That's the first one. And then I think, just because not everybody was here last night at the workshop, I'll just quickly say that Elizabeth and Bill and I have been working on this broadband grant, and we sent out the letters to, is it about seven broadband vendors, including Midco and CenturyLink, and then 5 others. And we've heard back from all of them but CenturyLink and Midco. And actually, CenturyLink emailed me back today saying they plan to respond, but they didn't tell me to say when. And I don't know if you had a chance to connect. I know Elizabeth was going to call Midco to find out.
Yeah, Melissa didn't call me back today,
Yeah.
so no, I have not heard.
So the stark reality is that if we don't have broadband partners, we really can't submit this grant. So we'll see. Hopefully by next week we'll know.
And next week is the deadline?
No, next week is just sort of a reasonable deadline that we need to know, because the deadline for submitting the application is August 4th, and there's a lot of work to be done before that. So if we can't find out 3 days before the deadline that, yeah, now they're willing to partner with us, because there's just too much information that has to be generated in the grant application.
It would, but it's going to be interesting because CenturyLink said that they did want a project, and this is the first time they've been proactive in saying they wanted a project. So if they do come forward, then maybe they do have resources and materials that they can move forward.
And Mr. Mayor and Council, I would add that this might be a good dry run because there's still a lot of money kind of flowing through the federal government and the state governments for broadband. So if we don't hit August 4th, there's going to be other projects and
Right.
other opportunities, including this very same grant next year.
Right.
And federal earmarks and infrastructure funds. And so, there's money out there. We're just kind of getting up to speed on how to tackle that question. And one of the things the council will want to consider in your budgeting process, almost everyone asks for a match. And so, do you want to set aside some funds for broadband, or are you going to look to the private providers to be that match, or some other source? Because I think one of the things we're going to have as a handicap is we don't have, like our road fund, we don't have a broadband fund to draw from.
Right.
Anything else, John?
The only other thing I was going to report is that we're in the process of setting up the city meeting to go over the JPA for the Sunrise River WMO. So we're looking at August, September. Actually, we threw some dates out there that go through the end of the year, but our intent is to get that JPA ratified, the edits to the JPA ratified by the end of the year, and hopefully much sooner than that. But that's actually moving forward, believe it or not. And it will be held, the meeting will be held here. I don't know if I told you that, Elizabeth, but it's going to be held here.
I received the email today, and I was like, we're hosting.
I volunteered us. That's my report.
All right, Rob, anything?
Just a couple things. So I was invited to check out Muddy Paws. They'd been doing a lot of work over there. It's looking really good. I think we're all going to be happy with it. The doors they'd fixed all those doors so that they're like a smooth surface that can't be scratched on. They'd hired a contractor to epoxy all the floors so it's easy to clean.
Oh, good.
So I think Olivia was planning on having us all come over, but I just happened to be in the area and swung through, so that's looking good. I saw him doing some dirt work over there today as well on the yard. But other thing was I've had some concerns from contractors about inspections and inspectors not showing up for inspections, and then being told just take pictures or we'll swing by when it's convenient for us to take a look at it, and not showing up to appointments. I have 2 other ones I got to follow up with yet that I haven't got back to. But I'm just curious kind of what the process is with that. If we're hearing that kind of stuff from contractors, how do we go about addressing that with the current providers?
And we only have one provider, which is Minspect, and we did not approve photo inspections unless residents did not want them in their homes.
Okay.
You know what I mean? When, during COVID, we said if someone says they do not want you in their home, then we would allow pictures. But we did not approve photos unless it's roofing, and we have always in the past,
Right.
you know,
Typical.
allowed photos. But to my knowledge, we don't have that in our contract. So if there are issues, we should know about that. I haven't heard anything of that. I do know that there are 4 inspectors and they're quite busy with everything that's going on, but I hadn't heard that they weren't showing up.
Okay. Yeah, and the 2 I've talked to, they were mainly sewers, and it's like when they do the scratching, you know, and that needs to be a visual from what I'm told. They need to see that that soil's actually proper. So those were the 2. I will say the one inspector that came to my house for my addition was very great. Good guy to deal with. The second one I talked to on the phone, not as much, but that's just been, I wanted to share that since the local contractors have brought it up. That's all I got.
Shelley, anything from you?
I have nothing.
And Sue?
I don't have anything either.
And I have nothing. So we'll move on to the Public Works report.
And at the past couple of meetings, we've had the fans on, and that was the intent, that we were going to have the fans on during the meetings in order to move the air around. And it came to our attention, there are some of us that are right behind the fans, and sometimes it is hard for people to hear us. And the reason why I think that you're not being able to hear us is because we don't have baffles behind us. So, or clouds, not baffles, clouds, I'm sorry, there, which is on the ceiling. And so the suggestion is that we add 6 more in order to baffle the noise from the fans, because the vents are along the walls and all of the clouds are in the middle. So we got a quote for the acoustics, and originally, I don't know why Jim thought 4, but because we really do need 6, there's 3 rows of clouds needed, but the quote in your packet was for 4, which was $1,740. To add 2 more, it's $760 additional to make a total of $2,480. Having said all of that, I have to tell you that the echo in here is, I don't know how many times better, but it's way better than it used to be with the addition of the acoustics, you know, materials that we put in here. So I will say, again, 100 times better than it was before. And I don't know with the addition of 6 how much better it will be, but it appears to me that putting up the clouds and the other materials was the answer for the echo.
And so you'll put 3 more here and 3 over here?
Yep, they would go across the back and then across the
here.
front.
So 3 here and 3 here.
Mm-hmm.
Are you looking for a motion?
We were looking for a motion. Or if you want to think about it, we can bring it back to the next meeting.
What was
Well, I
the,
only
what was the
heard half
total
of what-
amount again?
Huh?
2,480, is that what you said, Elizabeth?
Yeah, it was the additional $760 for a total of $2,480. And we would use the same vendor.
So I'll move to approve the additional acoustics in the city council chambers in the amount of $2,480 for 6 new panels.
This is Rob. Go ahead.
I'll second that, because I have a really hard time, even tonight, Elizabeth, hearing you. Bill, I can hear you well.
And I have them right behind, you know what I mean? That's what I said. It's literally right behind me, so I think the noise just...
So hopefully that's answered. So it's moved and seconded. Is there any other questions or discussion? If not, I'll call for the vote.
Janet, aye.
Rob, aye.
Shelley, I.
Sue, I.
And Jesse, aye. Anything else, Elizabeth, from the Public Works?
Nothing from Public Works.
No, we're back at number 17, City Administrator's Report.
I have 2 items. The first one is, I don't know how many of us, but I know it was at least me. I got a request, and this summer and last summer, I have not I'm not kidding you, I have not seen so many pool permits or pool requests as the past 2 years. And last year, it was about people wanting to use the pool cover versus the fencing material. And we amended the code to include a certain kind of pool cover that was able to accommodate so much pounds, and there were some things some standards they had to meet. So we did change the code. This year, there were a fair amount of people that questioned the height of the fence that we require. And right now, our code requires a 5-foot fence, a 5-foot non-climbable fence for certain standards of a pool, and the certain standards are building code, over 3,000 gallons. I mean, there's some criteria of when you would do that. And the question has come before me, why is it 5? Honestly, I can't tell you why it's 5. I don't know. I mean, Forest Lake is 4, other communities are different, and so I wasn't in the conversation when the code was adopted when they said 5. So what we did this year, there were people trying to make different accommodations for their pool, and I came before you and said, you know, here's one, it's a 2-foot fence, or a 2-foot barrier going on top of a above-ground pool in order to make that 5 feet, and that person, you know what I mean, they were happy that you approved that because it was an answer for them. Ultimately, I spent, I don't know how many, well, at least a half hour on the phone with that family. They ended up getting a different pool, but it didn't matter. I mean, we were working with them in order to do that. But again, it's come before us, and there's been a request that we look at it again. And so, asking the council, is this something that, again, you want to look at? Is this something that we put on the list? There's a big list, but I know this is a minor one, but I do not know why it's 5 feet.
I would say,
Unless someone else does.
No, and I think it might be a little odd because like the type of pool I got's a doughboy and it's 52-inch wall. And when that pool was put in, I was told that I don't believe it was by you, it was possibly the building inspector at the time, that I didn't need a fence because it was over 4 foot. So where the 5 foot comes from, I don't know. I have a fence around it anyways, but.
And yeah, I don't.
And it's not climbable, I mean.
well, it is a safety issue. I say put it on your list. And when we get to it, we'll get to it.
Okay.
Anyone else
No,
disagree?
I agree. Put it on the list. I think
Yeah.
reasonable.
The second item is from our workshop last night, which is calling for an additional budget meeting, and that budget meeting would be on August 31st at 6 p.m.
Need a motion on that?
Yep.
Okay, I can make that. Move to call for a 2023 budget meeting on August 31st, 2022.
This is Janet, I second.
It's moved and seconded. I'll call for the vote.
Janet, I.
Rob, aye.
Shelley said aye. Sue, aye.
And Jesse?
She's on mute.
It's Shelley, I.
All right. Oh,
What time was it?
6 p.m.
6 p.m. Okay.
Wednesday, the 31st, which is our 5th Wednesday of the month, right?
That's correct.
6 p.m.
And Mr. Mayor and Council members, I have nothing further.
Pencil it in. All right. And that, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, you said that was it?
I have nothing further, correct.
How soon do they get those panels in?
You know, believe you know, it's hit or miss these days, whether they have materials, you know, labor shortage, I don't know.
All right,
I think that particular contractor will be quick because they manufacture their own in-house.
Oh,
yeah.
So,
yeah.
That's right, he does. I forgot about that, yeah.
Moving on to letter E, the Planning Commission meeting is on the 20th, next Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. The City Council meeting will be on the 27th at 6:30. A City Council workshop on August 9th at 5:30. And we've got the calendars as per usual. So if there's nothing else, I'll ask if somebody wants to make the motion to adjourn.
This is Janet, I move to adjourn.
Rob will second.
So it's moved and seconded. Any other questions or discussions out in TV land? I'll call for the vote.
Janet, I.
Rabbi.
Shelley, I.
Sue, I.
And Jesse, aye. This meeting is adjourned.
Recording.